comrades, welcome back to the Liberation Hour. Yes, it is Wednesday, December 10th, 2025, here at WRFU 104.5 Radio Free Urbana. Yes, this is me, folks, Comrade Felicity, back in the studio. Super happy to be here, super excited, and today we're going to be covering some awesome news, and then I've got a really interesting segment on the current U.S. imperialist aggression against Venezuela and Venezuelan sovereignty. And so, yeah, we got a lot to cover today, folks. We got a lot of interesting, fun stories, maybe not so fun, but interesting. And then a really fun interview or discussion between Comrade Red and I. And so, folks, hello. Let's get into it. Let's go ahead. It's time for the top of the hour disclaimer. WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign online community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not meant to represent WRFU UCIMC. Folks, let's get into it. It's so good to be back in the studio today. I have not been back in the studio for a couple weeks, and so I'm really happy to be here. Really happy to be presenting to you guys live tonight, and we've got some really interesting stories for y'all. So I've got 3 stories here tonight, as per usual. First one up for discussion. The first story that I've got here for us tonight is the Honduras election. Now, this has been some interesting news, to say the least. I think that, frankly, I haven't really been keeping up with this as much, so I'm excited to read from this and see what my writers have been looking into for me this week, because this election, I do know from my last discussion last week with Comrade Erica from Venture Capital Status, Honduras has just had an election, and it has been precarious, to say the least. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. Honduras plunges into post-election turmoil as electoral official alleges, quote, monumental fraud. This is from December 6th from Drop Site News by Jose Luis Grandos Ceja. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, sir, but a member of Honduras' electoral authority says deliberate manipulation and internal sabotage compromised the general election vote, complicating a razor-thin race marred by U.S. interference. Okay. So, days removed from Sunday's presidential vote and still without a clear winner, Honduras's post-election crisis became more continuous after a member of the country's electoral authority denounced, quote, monumental electoral fraud on Thursday evening. Marlon Ochoa, a representative of the Libre Party on the three-member National Electoral Council, also known as the CNE, alleged coordinated and deliberate electoral fraud carried out by the other council members, Cosette Alejandra Lopez Osorio and the National Party, and Ana Paola Hall of the Liberal Party. The CNE had claimed in a social media post on Tuesday that the delays in election results were due to technical issues. 2 members of the council criticized Grupo ASD SAS, the company behind the transmission and dissemination of the election results reporting system known as TREP, that's spelled TREP, for carrying out software modifications without the unanimous authorization of the council plenary. But on Thursday, after repeated downtime of the TREP system continued to prevent the public forum from accessing real-time updates, the Honduran Center for Democracy Studies issued an alert calling the CNE to take action. Okay, so a lot of interesting stuff already happening here. I'm no expert on when it comes to election tampering, but this is fishy to say the very least. I would say that, especially with the United States having tampered in other elections, also having attempted to do regime change multiple times against the Maduro regime in Venezuela and other regimes, and having done it successfully, I'm not surprised to hear that the United States has some kind of role to play in this situation. And Gathering some more information here. The sequence of events is reminiscent of the 2017 Honduran vote that saw the National Party candidate Juan Orlando Hernandez reelected. Hernandez overtook his rival only after a days-long results blackout and power outage that sparked deadly unrest over alleged fraud. Hernandez's rule was a late feature in this year's contest after Trump vowed to pardon the former president, who was serving a 45-year sentence on drug trafficking conviction by a U.S. court. Trump followed through on his promise the day after the election, freeing Hernandez with a pardon while alleging he had been mistreated by the justice system. Oh, well, convicted felon helping another convicted felon, who knew? CNE member Ochoa criticized the lack of attention given by some international observers to Trump's flagrant interference with the Honduran election. Added to this extremely serious situation in the electoral process is the silence of international and national observers who avoid speaking out about the public and dangerous interference of the United States, the most powerful military and economic nation in the world, through Mr. Donald Trump, Ochoa says in a social media post. Okay, so yeah, as I was saying before, this is very concerning, but unfortunately not surprising that the United States is so flagrantly getting involved with something like this, even though we shouldn't be involved in something like this. This is another nation's election. There's absolutely no reason for us to be there. But of course, imperialism requires, especially with with the access that the United States government wants to Honduras, of course there is a vested interest in ensuring that the election goes the way they want it to. We've seen this throughout the decades. The United States has consistently done these things. It's absolutely no surprise, although it is something that we should be very, very opposed to. And in fact, it's something that we should be actively fighting against here at home in the imperial core of the United States. Our country is one of the most powerful countries in the world, with one of the most built-up militaries and powerful economies. I think that it's more than warranted for the United States, the people of the United States, to look at something like this as just a flagrant violation of international law, and also of the rights and sovereignty of Honduras, because I mean this is completely wrong. Not that international law necessarily matters to like people like Donald Trump, but as it pertains to this situation, we here in the home country, as they say, we should be extremely opposed to something like this, and be protesting about it, and be pressuring our government to stop interfering with this election. But there's a reason, and the deeper reason behind this isn't just because the United States wants to maintain hegemony, but this is also a result of the fact that the United States needs to maintain this kind of control, especially with powers over in the East that are gaining more traction. China, I would say, arguably probably has a bigger economy than the United States at this point. This is unsurprising. We've outsourced most of our manufacturing to other countries. The United States is very much a speculative market at this point, more built up on finance capital, which is historically not actually very reliable. So, I'm sure many people have been kind of hearing buzzings around the internet and just regular life about a possible recession happening because of the AI bubble, NVIDIA, and the fact that most of the economy is propped up on this very speculative market that AI might be profitable. Now, how does this tie in with Honduras? Well, as I covered last week with Comrade Erica on the interview that we did, I would say that this is very, very concerning that the United States wants so much power over Honduras, specifically not necessarily because of just political reasons, but also because there are many of these so-called freedom cities, or that connects back to this bigger network state, as we've discussed, which are, to say the very least, extremely concerning. They are run by rich billionaires, tech fascists, and those who want to bring in this weird neo-feudal order of these very decentralized cities that run on crypto. and some of them are already in Honduras, in which and so the United States does have a vested interest in having control over this area, over this land. And I mean, we should be way more up in arms about this than people are right now, because this is just a blatant that this is very blatantly going against democracy. Not that the United States was ever really for democracy, let's be real, but I mean, you could at least try and pretend like and so what my writers have here for me is, the overt U.S. interference comes as Washington under Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio brings a renewed focus on Latin America and the Caribbean. The Trump administration released its national security strategy on Thursday, a document that explicitly spells out the government's attention on the Western Hemisphere, framing a, quote, Trump corollary, I don't know if I'm saying that right, to the Monroe Doctrine that pledges to reassert U.S. dominance in the region. Trump's intervention in favor of Osfura aligns with his new vision, seeking to put an unconditional ally into power in, I'm not even trying to say that, but it's spelled T-E-G-C, T-E-J-G. I can't speak. It's a city, I'm pretty sure, that will allow the U.S. to expend its economic and military influence in Central America. Okay, I actually think that might have been from just the article. So enough said about that. I think that we all know where this is going. It's very unfortunate, and it's not only just unfortunate, but it is just further proof, I feel, just objectively of, American imperialism and the fact that I think that this is a valid point to be bringing up right now, but I feel like a lot of Americans kind of view something like this as, we had to get involved too, because, we're the leaders of the free world, this kind of American exceptionalist ideal of somehow this being, this being warranted. And I have to say, I really can't, I personally could never make that argument, mainly on the fact that I think that if you're going to pretend to care about democracy in the, quote, free world, why are we meddling in another country's election? Just a thought. But, American exceptionalism apparently knows no bounds. Okay, so next story of the night. Intellexa leaks reveal wider reach of predator spyware. This is from Common Dreams by Brett Wilkins, written on December 4th, 2025. The investigation provides one of the clearest and most damning views yet into Intellexa's internal operations and technology, said Amnesty International security lab technologist Jur van Bergen. I think that might be a Dutch person. I don't know, though. Highly invasive spyware from consortium led by a former senior Israeli intelligence official and sanctioned by the U.S. government is still being used to target people in multiple countries, a joint investigation published Thursday revealed. Inside story in Greece, Haaretz, in Israel, Swiss-based Wave Research Collective, and Amnesty International collaborated on the investigation into Intellexa Consortium, maker of Predator commercial spyware. The, quote, Intellexa leaks show that clients in Pakistan, and likely also in other countries, are using Predator to spy on people, including a featured Pakistani human rights lawyer. Predator works by sending malicious links to a targeted phone or other hardware. When the victim clicks the link, the spyware infects and provide access to the targeted device, including its encrypted instant message on applications such as Signal and WhatsApp, as well as stored passwords, emails, contact lists, call logs, microphones, audio recordings, and more. The spyware then uploads gleaned data to a Predator back-end server. The new investigation also revealed that in addition to the aforementioned, quote, one-click attacks, Intellexa has developed zero-click capabilities in which devices are infected via malicious advertising. The Intellexa leaks reveal that new consortium employees were trained using a video demonstrating Predator capabilities on live clients, raising serious questions regarding clients' understanding of or consent to such access. The fact that, quote, the fact that at least in some cases, Intellexa appears to have retained the capability to remotely access predator customer logs, allowing company staff to see details of surveillance operations and targeted individuals, raises questions about its human rights and due diligence processes, said Van Bergen. Quote, if a mercenary spyware company is found to be directly involved in the operation of its product, then by human rights standards, it could potentially leave them open to claims of liability in cases of misuse, and if any human rights abuses are caused by the use of spyware, he added. Okay, so we have a little, actually, I'll just go ahead and finish this. The new joint investigation allows Amnesty International's, quote, Predator Files, a 2023 report detailing, quote, how a suite of highly invasive surveillance technology supplied by the Intellexa Alliance is being sold and transferred around the world with impunity. The Predator case has drawn comparisons with Pegasus, the zero-click spyware used by the Israeli firm NSO Group that has been used by governments, spy agencies, and others to invade the privacy of targeted world leaders, political opponents, dissidents, journalists, and others. Okay, so I would say first, out the gate, this is unfortunately unsurprising, mainly because, this has been a long time coming, I feel, with spyware this comprehensive, and I do think that people should be really, really worried about this. If they aren't already using it on regular civilians, which I highly doubt is not already happening, they will soon. And by they, I mean government agencies, I mean mercenary groups like Blackwater, now rebranded to some other name that, you can't hide, bro. You can't, a lot of, I would say that this is extremely detrimental to a working class movement being constantly surveilled. It doesn't make it impossible. Don't get me wrong. This doesn't make this impossible. But the fact is that, they want this kind of spyware will absolutely be used to spy on revolutionaries and people who are actually trying to organize the people around a popular movement against the capitalist class. And this is going to be used by the capitalist class incessantly to ensure all around the world that working class movements and progressive movements can't get off the ground. I'm sure it's already been used on Palestinian activists. I'm not going on the record and saying that for sure, but I can say that, with the way that Palestinian activists and Palestinian movements have been treated in these last few years since the genocide really ramped up in the Gaza Strip, it would not surprise me in the least if this technology was already being used in that regard. I also think that we should be considering the fact that a lot of this spyware is it can and will be used against regular, ordinary American citizens, just as a means to gather data, because that's what a lot of these tech billionaires want to do. Remember that this always comes back to the capitalist class and the fact that they are funding these things. They are, they are the sole arbiters of this technology, and I think that we should be way more outraged at this, because the fact that who here gets scam links all the time from scammers who are pretending to be like Amazon or whatever. Who's to say that also isn't being used by these pretend scammers, but they're actually spies. It adds a whole new dimension to this, of just being a regular person and seeing this and being like, okay, but what could this be? Because it couldn't just be a scammer. It could also be people like the government trying to get information and access to regular people. And this is very concerning. We should be way more concerned about this. I am feeling very concerned about this, in many, many ways, because having especially learned about things like the network state from Comrade Erica and knowing how imperialist powers work, this is only the beginning. And understand that, this comes after things like the Patriot Act. This comes from the fact that, when the internet was created, not a lot of people, we didn't know exactly what it was going to be. I mean, I wasn't born until like way after the internet was created, but even so, like, now the people who control algorithms and everything are also those who have access to this spyware. So we should, we need to start, like, if you aren't already, you need to start joining organizations to support against, to rally support against spyware like this. And because data leaks like this happen all the time. I mean, like, this is so concerning. Your data is not secured, and in fact, a lot of it is being sold. So yeah, this is pretty bad. And spyware like this is absolutely going to be used against the people, against a popular movement and a popular front or coalition or whatever the heck is going on, against capital. It's going to be used by capital against working class movements. It already probably is being used to tamper these movements, as we know that the United States, CIA, FBI, all of these agencies have always taken leftist and left-wing opposition more seriously and tampered it as much as possible in comparison to right-wingers who, go blow things up and shoot up schools and do all of these terrible things. But it doesn't matter, because the CIA and FBI, the last thing the American government wants is an actual leftist revolution. Now that would actually be bad, guys. And so moving on to our final story of the night, Zelensky's government sabotaged oversight, allowing corruption to fester. Ooh, wow, we got a lot of corruption stories tonight. This is reporting from the New York Times by Constant Mehut and Kim Barker. I'm sorry if I'm saying your last name wrong once again. This is reporting from Kiev. This is from December 5th, 2025. Ukrainian leaders blame independent advisors for failing to prevent graft. A Times investigation found that President Volodymyr Zelensky's own administration removed guardrails. So, when Russian troops invaded Ukraine, Kiev's Western allies faced a dilemma: how to spend billions supporting a government fighting Russia without watching the money vanish into the pockets of corrupt managers and government officials. The stakes were high because Ukraine's vital wartime industries, power distribution, weapons purchases, and nuclear technology were controlled by state-owned companies that have long served as piggy banks for the country's elite. To protect their money, the United States and European nations insisted on oversight. They required Ukraine to allow groups of outside experts, known as supervisory boards, to monitor spending, appoint executives, and prevent corruption. Over the past 4 years, a New York Times investigation found the Ukrainian government systematically sabotaged the oversight, allowing graft to flourish. President Zelensky's administration has stacked boards with loyalists, left seats empty, or stalled them from being set up at all. Leaders in Kiev even rewrote company charters to limit oversight, keeping the government in control and allowing hundreds of millions of dollars to be spent without outsiders poking around. Ooh, someone's lying. Okay. Anti-corruption authorities have accused members of his inner circle of siphoning off and laundering $100 million from the state-owned nuclear power company. This is Energoatom and Energoatom. I don't know how to say. I'm notoriously bad with pronouncing things. Mr. Zelensky's administration has blamed this nuclear power company's supervisory board for failing to stop the corruption. But it was Mr. Zelensky's government itself that neutered the company's supervisory board, the Times found. In documents and interviews with about 20 Western and Ukrainian officials who have worked closely with company boards or served on them, the Times found political interference not only with the company, but also at the state-owned electrical company, Ukraine Energy. I'm just going to call it Ukraine Energy because it's kind of like a weird mix between Ukraine and energy is like the name. Anyway, as well as at Ukraine's Defense Procurement Agency. Some people spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss confidential deliberations. The political meddling with the energy company's supervisory board is a case study on how Ukraine's leaders have blocked efforts to prevent corruption. The Zelensky administration delayed the formation of the nuclear company's board, and when it finally came together, the government left a seat empty, impeding the board's ability to act. Had the board worked normally, it might have curtailed what the authorities now say was rampant corruption. Contractors on the nuclear company's projects had to pay kickbacks of up to 15%, according to investigators. Mr. Zelensky was elected in 2019 on a promise to eliminate graft, but after Russia's 2022 invasion, he relaxed anti-corruption rules in the name of speeding up weapons procurement and protecting military secrets. Mr. Zelensky also worked with political and business figures whom he had once declared to be criminals. The energy company's scandal has hamstrung Mr. Zelensky politically and weakened his case for Ukraine to join the European Union and NATO, two institutions wary of adding a member that is dogged by corruption. Mr. Zelensky sees those memberships as key to his country's future. If it does not clean up corruption, Kiev might not receive the hundreds of billions needed to rebuild the country after the war. There will be more There will be more hesitation to dedicate big funding," said Arvid Turkner, managing director for Ukraine at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, one of Kiev's largest financial backers. Okay, so quickly, I think that this is a lot. So first, with the corruption, understand there is a difference between the bourgeois, the elite class who is doing this corruption, and the regular Ukrainian working people who are having to live under this corruption and also under the boot of Russian soldiers who are currently doing their own imperialism against Ukrainians and against Ukraine for Russian imperial interests. So the victims at the heart of this situation are Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian working class who have absolutely nothing to do with the fact that this country is corrupt. It is very corrupt on the basis of the government and the fact that obviously elites run this government. I still don't, I know a lot of people are going to try to make this argument that, oh, well, this is why we shouldn't send them weapons, this is why we shouldn't support them in the war, this is blah, 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 blah. Okay, I do think that there needs to be a lot of reform, obviously, done on the government. I'm a revolutionary, of course, I believe that. There needs to be, a workers' revolution to, oust these corrupt officials. But we need to remember how the Ukrainian people are being affected by Russia's imperialism and by Ukraine's corruption. This is, and also, let's be so real right now. This is, all of the uncorrupt, apparently, countries that were supposed to be overseeing Ukraine's corrupt government. The Ukrainian government is just more open about the fact that they're corrupt. It's kind of harder to hide, but the United States government is extremely corrupt. We've been seeing corruption week after week after week with new stories coming out about Trump and about his government, and about even the Democrats, and there is corruption everywhere. So I find it kind of rich to hear about how the United States was apparently supposed to be overseeing, or people like Western powers were meant to be overseeing some of their funding and everything, because it's okay, yes, obviously there's a lot of corruption going on in the Ukrainian government. Obviously that's a bad thing. We need to do something about it. But also, the governments that are supposed to apparently be curtailing this are also corrupt. So I'm not really seeing how this is meant to be supporting Ukrainian people. And if anything, this is just one big circle of elites who are all doing corrupt things for their own reasons. And the people who are ultimately being hurt the most in this situation are the regular Ukrainians who are being forced to evacuate their homes, and who are being victimized not only by the Russian imperialist powers, but also their own government that is supposed to be supporting them. Yeah, no, this is, we should not stop supporting the Ukrainian people, but there does need to be, I would say, and I'm not entirely sure how this would even be possible in the current world order, like actual accountability, because NATO and all of these other and the European Union are themselves are very problematic, of course. So yeah, this really is terrible. But we must not forget who the real victims at the heart of this are, and continue to support the Ukrainian working class. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and play for you guys my interview, or the first half of my discussion with Comrade Red on what's going on in Venezuela. This is really important stuff. We really need to be understanding how American imperialism is currently trying to overtake Venezuela, do regime change, and have access to their natural resources, mainly their oil. Because this is textbook definite. I mean, you read Lenin, basically. Read Lenin is what I'm saying. But yeah, so I'm super excited to show you guys this episode. And I'll see you. Okay, so welcome back to the show, Comrade Red. This is the second segment of the Liberation Hour, in which today it is Tuesday, December 9th, 8 p.m., and we are pre-recording on the topic of Venezuela and what's currently happening. There's a lot of news out there right now, and I'm here joined by Comrade Red to discuss it, and really dissect it and understand it more. So, Red, if you want to give yourself an introduction.
Thank you, Felicity, and hi again. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really disturbed by a lot of the tensions right now from the White House as regards Venezuela. This is not news. Venezuela has been bullied and antagonized by the United States for decades longer than we can imagine, that we are aware of, decades longer than I've even been alive, and many of us have. So I think things might be reaching ahead, and I know that we in the APL are very active and are going to intensify our activity in frustrating and obstructing the war moves by the Trump administration. And having this platform here, I think it's an important space to just get out there to people, to uncover the deceptions at play and really the costs that could be at play, if the U.S. is capable of selling the U.S. people another lie for war.
No, exactly. And it's just another example of another, like, vaguely, I wouldn't call Venezuela socialist, but I would definitely call them like much more left leaning, if any, if to say the least, about them, and their governance, especially with their economic nationalization. Like, they are certainly not friendly to the US empire, if you will. And I think that not enough people are hearing this kind of analysis on what the US is trying to do, but they are able to compare it very heavily with what was going on with Iraq um, after 9/11.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone knows, or most people are aware, that the Bush administration swore and swore before the United Nations, even that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and is going to use them, and that he's hosting Islamic radical terrorists, and for the interests of security and for preventing, the use of weapons of mass destruction, Saddam must be overthrown. And of course, it is entirely coincidental that the stocks of Enron and Halliburton soared after the U.S. invasion of Iraq and the overthrow of Saddam and the exportation of crude oil from Iraq increased massively in the aftermath. And of course, it is entirely coincidental that Saddam was overthrown only a short while after he nationalized Iraq's own oil production and kind of strengthened the Iraqi bourgeoisie with a state monopoly, cutting out to a large degree American interests. So, of course, this is all entirely coincidental that only now Saddam Hussein, who has been sanctioned for over a decade, invaded already, now has weapons of mass destruction when oil interests are at stake. So I think, we've been in this situation before, and in the same struggle is ongoing. The US's oil interests overall are being threatened by Russia and China and their imperialist adventures into Ukraine and their investments into Zionism and indeed their investments in countries like Venezuela. That's why it's hard for us to look, to say with a straight face, because it's not true, that Venezuela is socialist or that Bolivia is socialist or Colombia or Nicaragua is, when a lot of their programs are fed with Chinese and Russian capital in exchange for their crude oil or exchange for their fruits or exchange for their timber or other precious minerals. So, imperialism is tearing apart the peoples of the global South. And it's not just US imperialism, it is very much Chinese and Russian imperialism. Just follow the ruble and follow the yuan, and you'll see who the real benefactors are. And if the US invades Venezuela, are Russian and Chinese troops going to be in Caracas to defend the Bolivarian Revolution? No. They're not going to uphold the Maduro regime. The U.S. will overthrow Maduro, and thousands and thousands and thousands of Venezuelan civilians will pay the price for Washington's greed. And that's something we absolutely cannot allow.
Yeah, no, and it's the fact of the matter is it's having solidarity, and I definitely don't agree with Venezuela taking Russian and Chinese money. But I do understand the fact of the matter is that they are currently up against an imperial aggressor who wants who's very much, I would say, like the military arm of the imperial network that exists now. The United States has a huge, huge military. It's extremely well funded, billions of dollars. And as we know, the Pentagon has never actually succeeded in an audit. So, um, is it the Pentagon? I believe it is.
Yeah, uh, various agencies like the FBI or the NSA or um, they're like hardly ever audited, and their discretionary budget. I don't understand why the most powerful government in the world um, can give a very dangerous, a very well-armed, well-funded international organization discretionary budgets. That doesn't sound very democratic to me, but we are definitely more democratic than Venezuela. Trust us. We're definitely more democratic than Russia and China and Iran. Just trust us.
We're
Also,
definitely.
we need more taxes and we can't tell you what we're spending it on.
No, and that's the or we don't need to tax the rich. We need to cut their taxes, but continue to tax the heck out of the poor. So it's cool, guys. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I would say as it pertains to a history of Venezuela, I'm not as familiar with their history, but loosely I understand that they did have a revolution, correct?
Yeah, it was a very staggered process. The U.S. Did maintain an incredibly reactionary regime in Venezuela from the 1970s into the late 80s. And kind of as a result of the of glasnost in the USSR and Reagan like refocusing his efforts in the nuclear arms race and beefing up NATO. Um, the State Department kind of permitted Venezuela to engage in elections again, and of course this was a general trend in Latin America. A lot of popular pressure was being exerted in countries like Argentina and in, of course, in Colombia, where there was a very militant struggle to democratize, even to a bourgeois state, to a bourgeois elections, because the conditions of fascist repression were just awful, and Venezuela was no different. But even with the new called elections, with the so-called democracy, I mean, in Venezuela, there was severe austerity, massive surges in prices for necessities, and there were violent resistance movements of the people across Venezuela, and some elements of the military were called in to violently suppress these popular movements, and Hugo Chavez, who many may know, was a young military officer who did not participate in this popular repression and attempted instead to overthrow this neoliberal regime. Now he failed, spent a few years in exile in Cuba and other places, and when elections came about again in the late 90s, he built with old allies and with contacts in the popular movement a broad coalition and was able to achieve victory in I believe the 1998 or 99 election. And from then on, he's espoused Chavismo, or a kind of social democracy, to engage in populism, to roll back the neoliberal cuts and corruption and austerity. Obviously, there's concerns about other forms of corruption, but um, overall, the livelihoods of Venezuelans have improved since the really the electoral reform of Chavez's victory. And as much as critical as I think we could and should be about Maduro and Chavez, the livelihoods of Venezuelans have improved overall compared to their state living under a fascist dictatorship in the 80s and neoliberal corruption and cuts in the early 90s. So, like we could, for instance, go into the fact that healthcare is regarded as a human right and that illiteracy has been destroyed, that massive units of social housing have been produced, that there's food distribution networks. As much as we like to say that Venezuelans are starving and it's all because of communism, um, Americans live in a government where we are losing food subsidies. But in Venezuela, there are programs where food subsidies are delivered to your door, to neighborhoods, and food insecurity is actively being combated. And all of that is in the face of growing sanctions from the United States. And, what we see today with Trump threatening Maduro, threatening the Chavista government in Caracas is not new. The US government has been trying to do this many, many times before. Trump tried to overthrow the Maduro government twice in his first administration, attempting to assassinate Maduro with a drone strike. Both attempts failed.
That's
Of course,
insane.
Obama, yeah, caught live, televised, that can be found. And as we know, Obama tightened horrific sanctions on Venezuela and manipulated oil markets in the same way that Reagan did to cripple the Soviet Union in its oil exports. But Obama worked with Saudi Arabia to devalue the international oil market to damage Venezuela's chief export, oil.
And Saudi
Um,
Arabia is also currently committing a genocide in Sudan. So,
and in
you know,
Yemen,
and in
is
Yemen.
venturing into Yemen as well.
Yep.
Um, and investing in Israeli genocide too. So, and giving it a rubber stamp. So
Hmm.
obviously, Saudi Arabia and its government are not the friends of the American people.
No.
Saudi Arabians are the friends and should be the friends of
Hmm.
Americans, but their government is very much not.
Yeah. No.
Um,
Yeah. It's just important to recognize that, I think, because I don't know. I feel like there's recently amongst the libs been like this romanticization of the Obama years, as if Obama was some kind of shining light that we so unfortunately lost after he left office. And I'm just like, no, actually, that's just plainly false.
well, I'd like to respond to that for a second.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Like Obama, uh, he won, I think, in a broad degree off of his supposed anti-war stances. The Iraq War was incredibly unpopular, and Afghanistan was becoming increasingly confusing and frustrating and impossible to win. So a lot of his luster was kind of won off of his anti-war promises. But he took those two wars and he expanded them to eight. The U.S. is now involved in Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan. Um, so like and we're back into Iraq and we're in Yemen, so the United, like Obama, and I think in his promises was very much a very cunning deception of our ruling class
Mhm.
to go, we're going to get out of Iraq, we're going to end these expensive, unnecessary, impossible wars, and we're all going to be good. We're going to spend those monies on things we desperately need at home, and he expanded it. And because of Obama and his, uh, you know, sword rattling, his doing the rounds for the military industrial complex. That's why a moron and a bloodthirsty tyrant like Trump can posture
Mm.
himself as a peace president, but that's only because the opportunities for more wars haven't arisen. It's like two serial killers who meet at a gas station. He's like, "Oh, I only picked up one hitchhiker today. Well, I picked up eight. I must be a sane, rational person because I only picked up one hitchhiker." He's just waiting for someone to put their thumb out. Trump is
Oh my
waiting
gosh,
for
that's
the
so good.
opportunity for wars to arrive. You know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
that's a really off the wall analogy, but
No, no, it's true though.
but I do think we see those conditions manifesting themselves in Venezuela today. Um, I think
Okay.
that Trump obviously is not shy about war. No one who launches record airstrikes in Syria, Pakistan, and Yemen, who maintains to this day secret operations in Somalia, who has gotten the U.S. into two nuclear standoffs with Iran and the DPRK in the first 6 months of his first term, cannot
Hmm.
be a peace president. But I think that there is very much the intention to create conditions that are favorable to go to war against Venezuela. I don't think it's about the presidents themselves. I think that the peace movement and popular movements in general in this country have grown too strong, have put their finger on the pulse too tightly to allow ourselves to be lied to. How many Americans even know that the U.S. is involved in Somalia? How many Americans even know that the U.S. is supporting uh, horrific war crimes in Yemen? I think that, and I think also another problem is that many Americans are unaware of crises in Sudan and in the Congo. So those things must be corrected, obviously.
No,
And
yeah. Yeah.
but I think that I just mean I'm going to finish up because I'm
Yeah, yeah.
rambling for a
No, you're
second.
good. You're good.
But I think it's not about, oh, Trump is a peace president. He wants to end wars. I think it's that the ruling class in this country know they have to be much more careful. They have to be much more,
Hmm.
conspiratorial in presenting justifications for their wars because the people have shown that we're tired of war. The U.S. has not been invaded, but the U.S. has been impoverished, indebted. We've lost thousands of our own people to unnecessary wars. And we've also suffered from the environmental and economic crises that war creates. So I think that we understand these things more than ever at this point. And I think that if there's going to be further adventures in imperialism, they better have good excuses. And I think the Trump regime is scrambling for a good excuse.
No, yeah, and that's the thing is this is the part of manufacturing consent that I think is very interesting, is they haven't really been doing that. They've just been kind of full steam ahead. And I can't honestly tell if it's because they are stupid enough to think that people will just buy this, or if they're so brazen because they realize that no one can stop them. Like I think that it's it's very interesting to watch like the news coverage and listen to just regular people especially talk about it. But I think that what I find so interesting is how the Trump regime has been handling the like how this looks to the public, because it doesn't look great is the thing. It looks pretty bad actually. But they haven't even attempted to manufacture consent with this, whereas before the Iraq War, you could still like pinpoint moments where they were definitely trying to like I would say covertly convince people that this was a good idea. Even though like we all like back then it was a lot easier because the internet was just a brand new thing. The democratization of information and media hadn't happened yet. And so there was like this control of the narrative that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and we need to be careful and we need to like XYZ, which makes sense for the time. Now of course it's a lot harder to do that, but still you would think that with Trump having essentially a chokehold on Fox News, or maybe it's the other way around, I can't quite tell. um, and the fact that CNN, MSNBC, all of these big mainstream news outlets are perfectly fine with laundering this narrative. And the only way we've really seen this happening is them trying to convince the American people of Venezuelan drugs. But the thing about that is it's kind of hard to convince people of this when we know we have a very long and I would say documented history of American dabbling or even full on participation in the drug trade. So it's a little hypocritical to say the least.
Yeah, I was gonna say that there is, I think, a degree of manufacturing consent here that we can't ignore. Um, like what Trump will say that drugs are pouring into this country that are killing Americans, while the primary drugs that are exported out of Venezuela by cartels are cocaine, which is far less lethal compared to fentanyl. And Trump is uh, exaggerating, or at best, and lying more reliably that fentanyl is coming out of Venezuela. Um, when at the same time he's ignoring the imports that come out of the cartels in Mexico and is produced domestically by drug labs here in the United States, by organized crime, by contacts of the cartel, and by some entrepreneurs, of the criminal underbelly of the U.S. So the U.S. is lying to us about fentanyl coming out of Venezuela. The U.S. is lying to us about, drug, like blatant drug trafficking. We cannot verify that the 87 people as of last month that have been killed by U.S. airstrikes in fishing boats were drug smugglers. And I don't think the U.S. even has the capacity to verify that every single one of those 87 civilians were drug mules or drug traffickers. And I think more so than just manufacturing our consent, I think that culturally it's being distorted. That even if every single one of those civilians who were killed were involved in some way with the drug trade, drug trafficking is not a death penalty offense. And these people were brutally killed with no warning by the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force. And I think it's very important that we reject that either it's not verifiable that these people were involved in the drug trade, or that we can accept that because even if someone was involved in the drug trade, they should be blown to smithereens by uh, by a cruise missile. Like that is not acceptable. So I think there's a cultural shift, a cultural manipulation here, as well as um, a lack of information that's being used to justify potentially going to war against Venezuela. So I think that there is a degree of manufacturing consent here. We are actively being lied to about things like fentanyl, and I believe about the murder of civilians, the committing of war crimes in the name of fighting the war on drugs. And I think that it's very dangerous for us to just ignore that drug trafficking is not a death penalty offense, and the death penalty is not a deterrent to violent crime. and is dangerous because of its capacity to kill innocent people. And also, there is no allotment in American death penalty, as far as I know, for using airstrikes on 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 those
Insane.
convicted. Like, I would be
Insane.
much more supportive if if airstrikes were being used on rapists and serial killers, but fishing villagers in Venezuela and the Caribbean, I think everyone can agree that they do not deserve the death penalty for the allegations of drug trafficking, and we have to call that out. We have to put our foot in the ground against U.S. policy, which is becoming more ravenous, more bloodthirsty, and is becoming bolder with its lies because it could lead us into the maelstrom of war with a state that has no negative intentions against the United States or its people.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think I just feel as though it's way more obvious what the intentions here are, considering that everyone knows how much oil Venezuela has. This isn't, and it's not that people didn't know how much oil Iraq had. I would say it was much easier to massage the narrative, of course, also because 9/11 had just happened. And even though there was absolutely no evidence that Iraq had been anywhere near that situation, it was still easy to manufacture consent because, ooh, scary Muslim bad, was basically the line they took. But I would say that what's interesting about this situation, is that it feels a little more brazen, and it feels a little more like, yeah, and what are y'all gonna do about it? You know, like, you couldn't stop us before, you can't stop us now. And this is where I think that organizing the masses and organizing working people is so important because, there will be people, civilians and just regular folk alike, who support this, but overwhelmingly, I don't think this is popular, by any capacity. And I think that, just as we learned from Lenin and the early 20th century about their use of um, the First World War as a means to show the people just how, not even show the people, but help organize the people around the fact that wars like this are unnecessary and imperialist. Um, People were very receptive to that because it made sense. And it was first and foremost, I think, because they didn't want to be involved in that war to begin with. No, it was very unpopular, just as I think this one is. I don't think anyone wants to go to war with Venezuela, any like well-meaning American citizen, because most of us are struggling to put food on the table.
And I think it's very important to bring home that the US and its wars, while, the US likes to posture itself that it fights defensive wars, uh, we have to get rid of the weapons of mass destruction that don't exist in Iraq. We have to stop the flow of lethal drugs that don't come out of Venezuela to save American lives. We have to destroy the Taliban in Afghanistan, even though Al Qaeda was an international organization and many of those involved were from Lebanon and Syria or even from Europe and the United States. Um, those who committed 9/11.
And many of
You
them we
know,
trained.
Yes, the Taliban itself was funded and supported to a large degree as offshoots of the Mujahideen in the fight against the USSR's imperialist invasion. At that time, it was imperialist again of Afghanistan. So, American imperialism is coming home to roost. It does come home to roost. And you see that in 9/11, where Al Qaeda and many of its allies in countries like Afghanistan or Pakistan or in India or wherever you can, look at the globe. Um, I think it's the perfect example because I don't take part in conspiracy theories and about, oh, Bush did 9/11. I think that's foolish and childish and unnecessary. But the US gave a green light, gave a rubber stamp to Islamic jihadism, to fundamentalist terrorism, and it funded and it organized and it informed and it defended diplomatically those organizations when it benefited American imperialism. And because they have such strength, because they have such encouragement, they turn as soon as they are finding opposition from the United States And because they want to expand their own interests as a ruling class in their own right, as, landlords and big rich landowners and imams, like clergy and so on, they strike out against the United States. And that's the thing. Americans live in such a bubble of isolation and nominal strength that 9/11, I think, really shook the people as something unconscionable, something completely unbelievable. It seemed impossible that something like that could happen. And because of that shock and that fear, uh, it was the perfect scapegoat to bring war to Iraq and to Afghanistan for decades. And I just want to say that I think that the U.S. and its meddling abroad is creating the possibility for more attacks like 9/11. It is creating enemies. It is creating martyrs. It is funding the wrong people. The U.S. funded Islamic radicals in Syria to fight the Assad regime. So the U.S. is in its support for Israeli colonialism, is pushing Palestinians and the Lebanese people into potentially the arms of these reactionary Islamic fundamentalists. So the U.S., with its imperialist wars, is opening the door for future attacks. The U.S. is meddling around with a conflict that we might not be able to walk back from, or for atrocities inflicted against the American people while Trump hides out in the White House bunker and other billionaires go to their safe houses and so on. They're safe. But we are going to be the victims of the 9/11s and of the bus bombings and the mass shootings. And it's all because of their wars for imperialist profit. So we have to understand that wars impact us negatively, and wars cost us tremendously. Wars worsen pollution and in the environment and the consumption of natural resources unnecessarily. Wars create humanitarian crises that lead to intensified immigration and immigration problems. And war also gets American citizens killed, either in combat or in collateral damage abroad, or in the potentiality for a counter invasion or for terrorist attacks in retaliation. We can't accept that possibility. We can't live in fear because we will terrorize other people who will seek vengeance against us when we did not desire these wars. We did not make these wars, and we certainly didn't profit from these wars.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that it's important to recognize this fact, especially because I feel like when we talk about Americans' benefits of being, I would say, very geographically like lucky, but in attacking Venezuela and brazenly, going like doing just a straight up imperialist aggression against them, we are very much risking a lot with this because we are essentially on this almost the same continent. Not the same, of course, because I mean, there's South America and North America, but um, I would say that Venezuela is certainly much closer. And this isn't to say that there will be terrorist attacks done by Venezuelans. This is not to say that, but it's more to say the fact of the matter is that if you piss too many people off, and you don't, look behind you before you leap, you might be leaping into something that you didn't think you bit off more than you could chew. And I think that especially with the fact that I mean Venezuela is very much arming themselves and preparing for a war because they've seen the U.S. imperialist aggression against Iraq. They have seen the U.S. imperialist aggression against other countries, and they're like, "Oh shit, we've got to get ready for this." And I would say that it's very interesting to watch as you see the like Americans who I mean when you think back to like large global conflicts like World War II, for example, Europe and Eastern, most of Europe was devastated by World War II. The United States was not. The United States had like Pearl Harbor happen, but largely was not devastated in such a way.
Right. The United States has not been attacked in any way by an organized state power in 84 years. So I think that might be why a lot of Americans of the middle classes do feel so confident about endless wars and kind of feed into this jingoistic nationalism because culturally, we don't understand. We don't feel the impacts. Our capital has not been occupied. Our cities have not been plundered. There has been no Nankings, the Japanese atrocities committed in Nanking during the Second Sino-Japanese War. That has never happened in the United States. So culturally, Americans are too overconfident. And as I agree with what you said earlier, you're going to jump before looking, and you might leap into something you can't get back up from. Um, as we saw in Vietnam, there was popular opposition to the United States' invasion there. And the US likes to say, oh, we had to stop communism, we had to alter the domino effect, we had to do this and that.
They always say
America
that.
wanted, right. America wanted Vietnam's cobalt and their coal and their fisheries and their timber and their tin. Okay. America leaped into something, it leaped into the jungle and it got torn apart. But that was an external war, that was an invasion. And I think something very similar would happen in Venezuela because there is popular support for the Maduro regime. As much as we are, this is distorted to us, and that, obviously Maduro, as a representative of the Venezuelan capitalists, is not wholly democratic, but he is representative of many of the, like, he does feed the interests, a lot of ways, of the Venezuelan working masses. And at any rate, they will not accept an invasion in any way of their country and of their democratic processes. There are militias, the Bolivarian militias, they are called, that have existed since the 2000s after the Bush administration nearly succeeded in a coup against the Chavez government in 2002. But that failed thanks to popular pressure, both at home here in the U.S. and in Venezuela. Um, but generally, there are millions of Bolivarian militiamen of militia fighters because it's men and women that are fighting in these militias. On top of the Venezuelan military itself, if the U.S., with its massive military, goes into the rivers and the mountains and the jungles and the plains of Venezuela, they are jumping into another Vietnamese jungle. And at a time when American imperialism is stretched so thin in East Asia, in West Asia, and Eastern Europe, and throughout Africa, it cannot maintain a decisive, effective war in Venezuela. They may overthrow the Maduro government. They may install these these cronies who went to law school in Harvard and Cambridge, the Democratic opposition, so-called, into power in Caracas. But the people of Venezuela will continue to fight, and I think that the U.S. will, fuck around and find out once again, just as they did with Afghanistan, just as they did with Vietnam, just as they did in Korea. As I've said before, American imperialism is in many ways a paper tiger. It looks fearsome. Those numbers are really high. There's a B instead of an M next to the Ilion. However, do the American people support this war? Are we going to just let it happen and not make it as difficult and expensive as possible for this war to go on, for thousands of civilians to die, for regime change to occur? We have that power to make it as difficult and as frustrating and as expensive as possible for the U.S. government to conduct this capricious, devastating war in Venezuela and everywhere else. And we have to make that happen because American imperialism is just going to let itself out of the cage because it think we opened it for them. That's not true.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to note that like this is the time to start mobilizing and getting getting people moving around this, because it's only a matter of time before we invade Venezuela, or the American government, I should say, invades Venezuela. We're not doing that. And I think that, as we saw, there was a lot of mobilization around protesting around the Iraq War. We need to do that times 10, because this is only going to continue happening. It does not matter who's in office, if it's an Obama, a Trump, a Clinton, a Biden, whoever, Democrat, Republican. I just saw today that Jasmine Crockett is running for the Senate, another Democratic, centralist, or centralist, a centrist shill who is going to make, vague statements about affordability and vague leftist populism, and then just fall right in line once she's elected. So it is the time to really start getting mobilized and prepped, and understanding that just because our government is doing this doesn't mean that we have to accept it. And I think that we can all see pretty clearly just how clumsily this is being done. I think back to one thing that it's kind of tangentially related, but Pete Hegseth going on his little rampage where he called all of like these military generals and shit to like a meeting, and it's just him on a stage being like, "We're real men" or something. And I'm like, what is this? This is a joke. Like, this is such a joke. I don't know.
No, I agree. And I think that's that kind of mentality again of U.S. imperialism thinking too highly of itself. Um,
Very American exceptionalist. Very like,
yes.
yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the I agree that now, like yesterday was the best time to organize. And I know that I myself am going to be active in a protest organized against Trump's appearance at the M&T Stadium in Baltimore this Saturday. I believe that's uh, bu- 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 December 12th, I believe. Um, and the
Oh,
theme
that's great.
around it is, yeah, um, the theme around it is opposition to the war maneuvers against Venezuela. So if anyone is near Baltimore, come and join us near the M&T Stadium on Saturday afternoon, because I just know Trump's not going to listen to us. Trump does not care about the will of the people, but other Baltimoreans and the nation at large needs to know that the American people do not accept this war. We have not accepted any war. We have been manipulated into permitting wars, but we have also shown incredible resistance to many conflicts in our nation's history. Um, you look at Palestine, and I think that as delayed and as useless as the Biden ceasefire was organized between Hamas and the Israeli entity, um, a lot of that was the result of popular pressure. And I think a lot of that was the Democrats kind of, covering their own butts for the midterms. Like, well, hey, we did that ceasefire. Sure, it was over a year and a half into this genocide, but we did that ceasefire, so you got to vote for us. At the same time, the popular pressure put them to make this, put them in a position to have that delayed ceasefire. Popular resistance to Zionism and to American imperialism's interest against Palestine has made it so expensive, has rallied such support, and has given so much in aid to Palestinians, and has damaged the profitability of this genocide. That must be intensified both for Palestine and for Sudan and for the Congo and of course for Venezuela. Uh, we have to make it again as expensive and as difficult as possible for American imperialism to engage in these conflicts. And when the bourgeoisie lies, when they elect the next Obama, who doesn't go to war against Venezuela, who doesn't so openly support Zionist imperialism, I'm pretty sure that's a clause in the oath of office is giving billions of dollars every year to Zionism. Um,
They need it
but
though. They need it for
right,
their
they do.
healthcare.
But when the bourgeoisie tries to lie to us with the next Obama, we have to know better. We have to start making the moves and to organizing ourselves to explode a system that is either open and proud and brazen and bloodthirsty in its imperialism, whether it's sanctions or murdering civilians or an invasions, or they're deceptive and they lie and they make promises of peace and then they betray them. We can't accept that. We can't accept that, and we can't be lied to anymore. And I think fundamentally, if a Bush can lie, if an Obama can lie, if a Biden can lie, and if a Trump can definitely lie, why are we still voting? Why are we still putting our faith in the same bourgeoisie who hate us, don't know us, and they benefit so magnificently from genocide and bloodthirsty wars and imperialism in general? These aren't our friends, and we shouldn't let them in our White House.
No, exactly. And I think that as it pertains to like just the fact that it doesn't necessarily, it really does not matter what party has who in office because it's the same shit every time. We're not like I really do hope that people learned their lesson from Obizi. I really do hope that they learned their lesson from him because he just outright lied at times during his campaign and just didn't do certain things that he said he was going to do because he doesn't have to. Like once they're in office, once they've secured that spot, they are no longer beholden to anything that they said before because now they've reached the goal. The only thing that they're beholden to is their donors. And that's why for a different reason, I'm still worried about candidates. I've talked about him a lot, Zoran Mamdani. Well, he's not at least openly funded by any like vast corporations or anything like that. He's already caving on so much that he was being way more outspoken about a year ago, and it is concerning.
Like he's already called Maduro a tyrant, and I think he said something like Venezuela is a failed state. And you know, even if it is a social democrat, even an earnest one, a hardworking one who may genuinely care, and he may think that this is the solution, the way forward, and has proposals to try and fix the problems of capitalism through capitalism. That's interesting. Even if he
Huh.
doesn't have even if they don't have donors per se, if the Democratic Party, which ostensibly is this vessel for deception and the dangling carrot of reform,
Mm-hmm.
uh, these candidates will have to cave to the Democratic Party establishment and to their donors and to the members of the capitalist class that make up the super delegates and the pundits and the members of the electoral college that favor the Democrats and so on. So because we are dealing with two imperialist parties that drop sanctions, that manipulate global markets, that abuse migrants, that just beef up our military for no reason, and they what's the word? They interfere in elections and they invade sovereign countries. Even someone so eloquent and genuine and seemingly hopeful like a Mamdani or a Bernie or an AOC, they are going to cave. And this is why we can no longer put our trust in the same system that has verifiably lied to us in exchange for believing in them, in exchange for not seeking radical alternatives to the radical solutions that all of these candidates, that quote unquote, both of these parties represent.
Yeah, and it takes us back to the main, I think, essence of this problem, which is that we need to abandon the Democratic Party and the Republican Party for that matter, of course, but the Democrats more earnestly, I feel, because the Republicans are obviously fascist. They are obviously going down like the white supremacist, fasci pipeline. But the Democrats are doing this in a much more covert way that I think that a lot of people are not familiar enough with yet. I watch and listen to a lot of like DemSoc podcasts and stuff because I sometimes like some of their their content broadly, but of course their politics I very much disagree with on many different cases. But one thing that I've seen is there is this kind of renewed hope with the elections of people like Zoran Mamdani. And I'm just like, you guys need to lock in because I promise you this is going to be the same situation. And if it takes this person failing for you to realize that, then okay, but it shouldn't have to because we've seen the failure happen over and over and over again. The Democrats are not here for us. They are a bourgeois party. And I mean, I remember back when Zoran was running just for the primary, just for the spot, the spot for the Democratic nominee. That I just remember thinking, why is he running as a Democrat? Or running for the Democrat, like running to be the representative for the Democratic Party when he has all of this like very like radical language going on with a lot of his like policy proposal. And it's because this is what they do every time is they rope people in with much more radical language and ideas that are very popular. And then as they, once they gain that popular momentum, of course they begin to deteriorate. And so it's the same situation. And as it relates to Venezuela, if it was a Democrat in office, they would just be trying to sweet talk us into something like this. The Trump White House very much wants to strong arm us into going into a war with Venezuela, but the Democrats are a little more sinister about it. What do you think?
Well, I mean, just because, I think that manufacturing consent works two ways. I think that if we just accept that only a Trump, and we all know that he's lying about the peace president. You can ask, the civilians sacrificed to capitalist profits in Syria, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, Palestine, Ukraine. Uh, and to those killed by U.S. sanctions in the DPRK and in Iran and elsewhere, like you know that Trump is bloodthirsty. You know he has blood on his hands. The American citizens are the Americans, full stop, that are dying in ICE custody or just their lives are being destroyed or they are being enslaved and trafficked by ICE, supposedly. We know that Trump has blood on his hands. We know that he's lying about being the peace president. No American president can be a president for peace because the system that he represents, or, so far it's been he, but the system that they represent is a system of war, is a system that destroys democracy and goes against the interests of the masses to extend exploitation and profit. Um, but all that to say is that with manufacturing consent, we cannot accept this narrative from outlets, liberal outlets, from MSNBC and from CNN that only a Trump could do this. Only the Republican Party would be so brazen and violent and hostile to a neighboring country of ours. Obama supported elements of organized crime, supported domestic terrorists through NGOs and through State Department funds, through diplomatic recognition and support for those elements that were within the opposition to Maduro from 2015 until 2017 when he left office. And before that, as you know, he dropped heavy sanctions on Venezuela that increased food scarcity, that made things like medicine more unreliable, and he manipulated foreign markets to damage the economic prosperity of Venezuela. So, like, as we know, uh, imperialism is not just the dropping of bombs and boots on the ground. Imperialism is also sanctions. Imperialism is also manipulating global markets and cutting countries out diplomatically at the UN or what have you, because these things actually do get people hurt. They do damage the freedom and the prosperity of people who aren't even guilty of the supposed crimes that the U.S. accuses them of. But people starve and people lack medicine and people lack shelter because of American sanctions. So in the same way that Trump is very much guilty very much has blood on his hands with his airstrikes and his sanctions. So does Obama. And while Obama was not brazen enough to launch airstrikes into Venezuela, we know that he supported regime change in Venezuela, that he tried to ruin the economy of Venezuela, all for regime change. I don't necessarily think that if regime change is on the same platform of both Republican and Democratic parties, that if war and sanctions and starvation and economic sabotage and warfare is on the platform of both the Democratic and the Republican parties, we can't say that they're different.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really great point, and I also think that it's I really like that you pointed out the sanctions because I feel like it's not talked enough about. I feel like Americans have just kind of like accepted this as like a reality of our foreign policy, even though like we shouldn't be accepting this. The fact is that like why like I feel like these sanctions in many ways have been responsible for the deaths of thousands just by virtue of keeping resources from people. And that the only way that you could justify that to your own population is by laundering an image of these quote others who are less deserving than us. And I think that's pretty fucking insidious to say the least. And so yeah, don't believe anything that the Democrats or Republicans say remotely about the situation, and continue, I would say, to stay skeptical and protest against this war.
I agree. Yeah. If anyone is able to join a protest near you, again, there will be one against the Trump appearance at the M&T Stadium in Baltimore this Saturday. I encourage people to attend to make their voices known, just as they have been or should be for the genocide in Palestine and for the conflicts in the Congo and in Sudan, and against imperialist war and imperialist conspiracies and sabotage generally, because you don't benefit from imperialism. Your jobs are going to be shipped over to these countries that have been beaten down by the jackboots of U.S. imperialism. Your children will die in these countries. Your environment that we share will be devastated by the production of bombs and bullets. You do not benefit from imperialism as a working class American, as the average American. You are not saved, even from cocaine, when cocaine also comes from Colombia and from Mexico and from Bolivia by the overthrow of the Maduro regime. And bullshit Trump is obviously proven to us that you definitely aren't saved from fentanyl, because fentanyl isn't a major export from Venezuelan cartels. So don't let yourself be lied to. Don't let yourself accept a war that is not just not beneficial to you, but harms your interests and endangers you. Um, and if you think that America has some obligation to be the policeman of the world, that America is itself a democracy, and that America needs to end the tyranny that supposedly exists in Venezuela, uh, how are you going to accomplish this democracy? By destroying the demos, by killing thousands, and by ruining the lives of millions. You're not going to do that. You're not going to achieve democracy in that way. And it's the same thing I've told Zionists in protest before, is that if you are so gung ho about destroying Hamas and you're so critical of the Hamas government, which is not popularly elected, by the way, for its homophobia and for its chauvinism, its sexism, and so on. If you are so critical of these things, you are. Why are you destroying the only people who can change that? Why are you preventing the people of Palestine from having the chance to change? Reform and change, progress, revolution is impossible from the grave. And we can't accept the lies that center around the need for change by destroying everything. And that's as true for Venezuela as it was for Vietnam, as it was for Korea, as it was for Syria, as it is for Palestine, as it is for Ukraine. And I shouldn't have to list so many fucking names. It should have been stopped long ago. But we have the power to stop it now, and we have to stop it now with power to the people and power to the working class.
Period. I think that's such a good way to leave this off. I that was such a I really love that, Red, and I think that Comrades, once again, listen to Red and please, continue to organize and continue to fight back against American imperialism. Do whatever you can. Even if it's just having a conversation with your family members at the dinner table, doing education around this subject, even if it's, in your small reading group, discussing and talking about it. Continue to stay educated on the topic and continue to stay skeptical of our White House and of our media as we understand it. It is extremely deceptive and will use every trick in the book to convince you that this is a justified war. It is not, and do not forget it.
Right. I agree. And as I've said before, when it comes to things like boycotts, when it comes to things like financial aid, like donations, or when it comes to things like protests, those are powerful things that powerless people can do. And when you divest any sense of self and any potential in these avenues, that is when they become powerless acts.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as I said, we have to make it as unprofitable. We have to make it as expensive. We have to make it as difficult. We have to destroy the confidence, both psychologically, culturally, and politically, of the bourgeoisie to go running around tramping on our neighbors, and ruining our economy, ruining the global environment, creating humanitarian crises. I think most Americans want to be able to breathe air. I think most Americans want to have a currency that's not devalued. And I think we don't want to see refugees marching through the snow because their homes were destroyed by bombs made in Michigan or in Milwaukee. So I think obviously,
Or in the Somali
um,
homeland of Minnesota.
exactly, from the lakes to the river.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that we have to remember the power that we have, and I think if you do think that these actions are powerless, why do the people in a democracy supposedly lack power? And why does that need to change? And how can we change it? And I think, as we know, the only possibility for that is not a Mamdani and his reformism, or a Bernie and his reformism, or a AOC and her reformism that will lie to us and fail us, but it is in the working class and its revolution that does not need to profit from plundering oil and destroying governments, but it is a working class and its revolution that depends upon peace, that depends upon productivity, that depends upon building homes and cleaning up energy and taking care of our health and our nutrition and our education. And obviously, there is no room in that for war. So if you're being lied to for causes to go to war, obviously it's not necessary, but for anyone but those who can profit from it, from those who are in power, and that is certainly not us in this system.
Yeah, exactly. And that's imperialism, folks. Well, thank you so much, Red, for coming on the show tonight. I so appreciate you coming and recording this with me. And I am so incredibly excited to release this and continue to have conversation with people on the very necessary resistance that we need to be doing against our own government and its bloody, imperialist aggression. So yeah, thank you so much, comrade.
Thank you for having me, Felicity, and I'm excited to get out there on the streets, as many of us have been. And I hope that people find this conversation engaging, and I hope that people don't lose hope in a better world and don't lose hope in themselves.
Well, if they're watching the
War,
Liberation Hour, they won't.
exactly. So thank you again very much. Thank you to everyone who took the hour out of their day to listen in, and keep listening in, folks, and keep fighting on.